Up next, we have Dr. Mohammed Alaqad and Dr. Sorayyaei Azar with their presentation title, Framing Genocide, Comparative Linguistic Analysis of Western Media and Al Jazeera Narrative on Gaza. So it's mine. It's me and my colleague. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Presentation. So it's very interesting. Today we are going to speak about how the Western media narrate the war on Gaza and the genocide in Gaza especially starting from October 7th up to date. So in the mainstream of Western media, we are focusing here and we are navigating only on BBC because BBC considered one of the most prominent, I think, in my personal point of view, one of the most prominent and trustworthy mainstream media in the West. So this is our topic, framing genocide, the comparative linguistic analysis. So we are going to do a kind of comparative text and critical text analysis between Western media and the Eastern media narratives, which is framingly we are speaking here about Al Jazeera. Okay, perfect. Okay. So as we all know, the pivotal role and the critical role of social media and the media mainstreams of the West and even the East, as we have witnessed during the past year of genocide and many years before, the media could change the trend of a country, could collapse a country, actually, could help in collapsing or raising a country from nothing, only by focusing on social media. Nowadays, the biggest and the giant company in the West focusing and allocating a huge budget only for social media, because the social media coverage could trend and could change the trend in certain country from A to B. So this is what we ignite our thought to focus on this. Also, the production of social media is going to talk about here, as we mentioned, in the narrative of genocide and how they narrate genocide in Gaza and what are the ideological language perspective they are using and the word choice lexicon, word choice, whether they are using some kind of ideological perspective to narrate the war on Gaza in a positive or a negative way against the Palestinian and against the Eastern side. So our research objective here is to analyze the linguistic choices used by Al Jazeera and BBC, as the main mainstream in the Middle East is considered Al Jazeera, and the pivotal mainstream in the West is considered BBC, as we mentioned, in reporting the Gaza war. So to identify also the underlying ideological and culture biasness. So here we are focusing on the bias, and I think no need to have many articles or many research papers because it's very clear, it's very obvious to anyone can see the bias in terms of not only BBC, but the most of the Western media, unfortunately, and even by default and maybe by the grace of Allah, this war and this genocide in Gaza, as we say in Malay, the buka mask, which is fall and reveals all the real faces of the people, whether in the East or the West. So also our main objective also to understand the impact of these narratives on the global audiences and how these narratives are going to impact the audience's understanding. So here it's a very, very interesting topic. Over 100 BBC staff accused network of pro-Israel bias in Gaza coverage. So even the staff of BBC itself, they are accusing the coverage of the mainstream with biasness toward or pro-Israel. So the consequences of adequate coverage are significant there. Every television report, article, radio interviews that has failed to robustly challenge Israeli claims, has systematically dehumanized Palestinians. It's very clear. So they have signed a petition and sent this petition letter to the head of BBC, reported by the Independent. So what are the theoretical framework? The theoretical framework we are going to use for this study is the CDA, which we call the critical discourse analysis, in order to examine the power, ideology, and the language used in media narrative, what kind of language they are using. Sometimes they are using sympathy or emotional language in order to attract the audience, in order to make the audience sympathize with one another. Framing theory explores how media shapes audiences' perception through selective emphasis. The representation of conflict here, we focus on the portrait of victims, aggressors, and geopolitical power dynamics. In terms of methodology, I think my colleague, Dr. Ali, will continue. Yeah. Come in. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. It's my pleasure to be here with our brothers and sisters. And this is a very interesting topic for me also. This is my first time focusing on the media. But before this, I am a discourse analyst, actually. My supervisor is here already. So, ex-supervisor, I am alumni of UN, and we did a lot of discourse analysis and on the different texts, especially academic discourse. This one, when Dr. Mohammed invited me to join this kind of collaborative research, it was very interesting for me to look at how the lexicons and structures, syntax, and rhetorical strategies of the writers, how they shape and influences our perceptions when we are reading the news, and especially on the media. The methodology that we followed and employed in this comparative discourse analysis study was a kind of, as you know, discourse analysis is a kind of qualitative research design. So we focus on the content, understanding of the messages or the text and discourses that being used in this corpus. And we collected our data from different two sources of the news articles, Al Jazeera and BBC. And we tried to filter and screen the data to see to avoid being biased selection of our data. These are the principles and basic principles of the research methodology, as you know. So after cleaning the data and screening all the data means that removing all the pictures, all the numbers, because when we are coming to the level of the discourse analysis, when we want to use softwares like, for example, Wordsmith or NVivo or Atlas TI, these softwares need to have only text. So we only extracted the text without manipulating anything. And then we looked at the way that lexicons and structures and the rhetorical strategies, how being employed in these social media. So this is kind of methodology that I wanted to share with you, how it works. And later on, I am and Dr. Mohammed, we are more happy to listen to your questions or any comments. So in the data analysis procedure, there is one framework, very well-known framework, that is called Fairclough's framework. And it looks at the three dimensions in this framework. Fairclough started to analyze the three levels. It goes to the discourse or text first, and dimensional. The three dimensions are here: textual analysis and discourse practices and the social part or pragmatic parts of the discourse that being used in the different text level. So we look at the textual analysis of the media, means that we looked at the lexicons, we looked at the syntax, and we looked at the rhetorical devices being used in the media, in these texts, two types of texts. And then we moved on to the discourse practices, analyzes how media sources construct and disseminate stories, considering ideological positions. After that, we looked at the pragmatic level of the text to see that how, for example, different layers of the power and the different layers here being used and employed, and how they influence or impact on the audience or readers' perceptions. So as my colleague, Dr. Mohammed, stated about the objectives, I don't want to go to the objectives. A little bit, sorry about the text color. Yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah, a little bit wide, and then I need to read a little bit about these findings. So in the findings that we want to focus on Al Jazeera, first emphasizes Palestinian suffering based on the lexicon and the phrases that we have found out, and it shows on emphasizes on resistance. Uses emotive language. We found a lot of emotive language in order to see how human rights being violated, and also frames Israel as an aggressor and occupier. These are the main focuses of this news and the text or discourses. Whereas in BBC social media, BBC News articles, we found mainly neutrality and reflecting Western political perspectives, and focuses on diplomacy and sometimes going to international law. Avoiding emotionally charged language in BBC social media or news articles, and all the time presenting a neutral view. I am going to share some findings of our text analysis. It is very interesting. Let's look at some of the examples here I brought about lexical choices that we have in two columns, as you see, Al Jazeera and BBC. So these are exactly directly taken from the social, these news articles. And under Al Jazeera, we have the terminologies like genocide and like, for example, threat, brutality, atrocities. So these differences are in the lexicon, it's very clear. And on the BBC, you can see some of the words like, for example, some neutral terms like, for example, evacuation orders, counter-terrorism operations, and hostilities. Also, if we go to the references to colonial modernity and the imperial West to frame the conflict as global imperialism, under BBC, we can see describing Palestinian fighters as a terrorist organizations. They are going to defend their land, their soil, but they were called terrorist organizations. If we go to rhetorical strategies, how we can see that how emotive appeals being very prominent in Al Jazeera news articles, like, for example, evokes sympathy with phrases like indiscriminate killing, deprivation of basic necessities, Israel's bombing kills Palestinian civilians, polarization positions Israel as aggressor and Palestinians as victims, freedom fighters or resistance groups. Whereas on BBC, we can see some tones like presenting conflicting perspectives without overt alignment, and Israelis are killed while Palestinians die. So these are two lexicons that if we look at the semantic layers, different layers of the meanings of the lexicons in terms of semantics, definitely there is a difference. Looks like, for example, we use love and like. The layers of the meaning and the influence of the words totally different. So as we see here, for example, Israeli actions are described as retaliator or retaliatory, or defensive, while Palestinian actions are labeled aggressive and or terrorist. So when we are looking at these lexicons and the choice of the lexicons and the rhetorical strategies that being employed in different social media, especially these two types of the news articles from two different parties or two different mindsets or two different points of views, we can understand that how media also influence our readers' perceptions in terms of the understanding the clear status of the people, for example, Gaza, the people, our brothers and sisters, how they are suffering in this land. Some of the key examples, again, here you can see under Al Jazeera, we have found a phrase like, for example, Israel is engaging in a genocide of the Palestinian people. And whereas if we go to the BBC, it says that the IDF said its troops had conducted a counter-terrorism operation, or journalists silenced as part of a systematic targeting campaign, even as Dr. Mohammed showed on the sample of the picture or news, that even the staff of the BBC started to protest and against this kind of policy. Under Al Jazeera, we have evokes outrage and solidarity by portraying Western powers as complicit imperialists. And on the BBC, we can see uses cautious language to avoid attributing moral blame, focusing instead on operational details and humanitarian impacts. So we did a kind of comparative analysis here. So we found these things that we want to share with you. Al Jazeera adopts an advocacy-based approach, emphasizing resistance. The BBC prioritizes impartiality and appealing to a global audience. Both influencing people, we cannot say that it is not influencing, but in a divergent and different ways. In socio-political implications, Al Jazeera mobilizes grassroots activism and regional solidarity. BBC fosters diplomatic engagement through neutral reporting. Divergent narratives shape policy decisions and global perceptions. To wrap up, when we are looking at these kinds of news articles, Al Jazeera and BBC here just only samples. Maybe one of the limitations of this project or this study going only onto two news or two kind of mindsets. But this is a part of a small project. We are interested in going to deeper levels and go to bring in a lot of data and focus and to see that what's happening in the zone of the media and how these media are going to influence global perceptions and social political actions. So understanding these narratives is essential for informed discourse. So these are our recommendations. Encourage critical media literacy to assess biases in conflict reporting. Promote diverse sources for a more balanced understanding of global conflicts. And we need further research on the impact of media framing on policy making and public opinion. Thank you very much.